Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck tech video. Today I'm going to show a few videos, and I'm re-recording a few I've already done because some issues with YouTube's editor software currently. This one is another do of my Arixmethes Slumbering Isle EDH deck. For the remainder of the video I'm just going to call him Arix because I don't know how to pronounce his name correctly. But this is a very interesting commander. It's essentially a 4-mana ramp spell in the command zone, and I like to call it that my commander for this deck is Explosive Vegetation because it's essentially a 4-mana that puts man to play tapped sort of ramp spell. I've seen a lot of decks running Arix, and they do all sorts of kinds of things, like from Kraken or Giant Creature Tribal or Ramp.deck or combo focused, or yeah, there's a lot you can do with this. And my particular approach is a blend. Mostly it does try to build around a combo, which I'll show in a few seconds. But it also has the backup of using Arix and other big creatures to finish the game off. The biggest issue with this is building focused around one build. Because if you get blown out, then you kind of suffer. Well, let's explain that. So we have a 4-mana 12/12. It does not come into play already as a 12/12. Currently, at the time of this recording, there's a strange rule described on Gather, where he comes into play and he triggers landfall and creature entry at the same time. He is known to be a creature when he comes into play, but then it checks to see these counters on him, then he ceases to be a creature until those counters are removed. You can remove counters by casting a spell. The most important part on this being the word may right here. You don't have to. So you can do something like you can do a lot of things like ramping him out as fast as possible and removing the counters as fast as possible using things like Ataxian Probe variants or Frantic Searches. I would not actually recommend that. So yeah, you could run him out and attack with a 12/12 as fast as possible, but if your deck is built around that and he gets bounced or blown out, then you've set yourself back pretty far. Alternatively, what my deck does is it just uses them as literally Explosive Vegetation in the command zone. The deck is finely tuned. It does not have very many 4-drops at all. It tries to get him on turn 3 if possible. You can, of course, tune this to get him out earlier. My deck doesn't run Soul Ring or Mana Crypt. Things like that mean you can easily turn to him. But that means this deck is designed to play 6-drops. Impactful 6-drops. And again, this is a combo deck, and I'll go ahead and show the combo here. So again, Arix, 4 mana, basically is a come to play tap land. And even when you remove the counters, he still has the mana tap ability. What we want to do if we're trying to combo with Arix is give him one of 2 enchantments. There's a few ways of doing this. These are the 2 I'm running in my deck. And again, this is a little tricky here. You don't want to remove these counters until you are absolutely ready to take advantage of Arix. For example, there's a special card in your hand that checks for creature power, or you want to try to combo off. So you keep the last counter on him until you're ready to go. The issue being, if the card in your hand you need to cast is one of these enchantments, you cannot target him with the expectation of removing that counter and putting the enchantment on him. You have to reveal him. Make him vulnerable essentially to removal by casting something else to remove the last counter, and then you can enchant him. But, in short, if you have enough blue mana open to... You can use his blue mana to cast one of these if you need, but you need about 3 blue mana to work with, more if there's a blue card in your hand. But these enchantments here, Freed from the Real and Penim's Aura, allow you to untap Arix for 1 blue mana, essentially giving you infinite green mana. Penim's Aura is strictly better because not only can you get the infinite green mana, but you can use this ability to make him a 23-powered flying shroud creature and just murder somebody out of the air. Earlier builds I ran with this actually ran things like Berserk, because that was a one-shot kill on an opponent. It's funny, and you can also use Berserk on opponent's creatures as a pseudo-removal. The timing is very stringent on that. But Penim's Aura is by far the strongest card in the deck. A backup plan is Freed from the Real. You can, of course, put this one on like an opponent's Eldrazi if you don't want to get annihilated out of the game, because you control the enchantment and the tap ability. There are other things this deck does. Essentially, it just wants to create a bunch of mana. Let's go through the deck by card type first. And I'll explain cards as I go and other suggestions and issues you may want to be leery of when running Arix. Now, creatures that tap actually can be a backup combo. For example, whatever this thing's name is, Kiros Follower and Selvala. Both of these combo with those same untap enchantments. If we have our Arix in play, and this is the thing that taps to untap Arix, we can still make the infinite mana. And Selvala herself can make any color of mana, including blue. So these are like backups to Arix. Selvala is a ridiculous creature in this deck and oftentimes a severe threat because she may tap for 12 plus mana on her own. Kiros Follower is one of the many spells in the deck that is designed to get Arix out on turn 2 or 3. Going through the rest of the deck, the next obvious creature, really, we have a lot of ways of drawing this deck. This is Laboratory Maniac. So if we have infinite mana, we can either plug our entire deck into play with Genesis Wave, or we can land this and just draw our entire deck. That is kind of the cheesy win of the deck. The other one is via combat. So let's go through the rest of the jankers that you would expect to see in a blue-green deck. And I will talk about the fact that I'm running a blue-green deck at the end of this video. Yes, I know I'm a hypocrite. This is the two color combination I tend to rant on the most, but I'm still playing it. Topic for later. Anyways, ramp spells in Birds of Paradise and Llanowar Elves. Nice 1-drops. Sakura, Tribe Elder, Lotus Cobra. This is a very fun card. This is not the deck that can make the most use of this. For example, like an Omnath deck or a massive land ramp deck, like Lord Windgrace. But this is still a fantastic ramp spell, even if it's just getting Arix on turn 3. We have Gilded Drake because this is kind of like the best blue-green card fillers that we got. Something like this is a great mid to late game disruption spell to take whatever threat we can. We have Farhaven Elf, Wood Elves. Fierce Empath is great. You will see a fair number of 3-mana green creatures here. Selvala is a part of this because, well, she's a 3-mana green creature, but there is a Woodland Bellower that can tutor for non-legendary 3-drops. Fierce Empath can go get that Woodland Bellower, or Woodland Bellower can get Fierce Empath to go get something else. It's good little toolbox. The Eternal Witness for value. We have Rex Sage. And moving on up, we have a single 4-drop in the package other than Arix is Clever Impersonator. Arguably one of the best clones in the entire game. Being able to clone anything from a Planeswalker to a land is, well, not a land, but it's just, yeah, literally worth its spot being a 4-drop. But moving on past the 4-drops, we have some 5-drops. We have a Maul Drifter for draw, some ETB value. Tatyova, I can again go on my soapbox ranting about how obnoxiously persistent blue-green value and draw effects are, and this is just another example. Like when you see something like Garna, the black-red legendary from the same set, that does seemingly nothing compared to something as... yeah, this is degenerate. But we're running it because this deck likes to put lots of lands into play. Our commander does trigger a landfall, so even this will let our commander cantrip. We have the Woodland Bellower to go get all those fun 3-drops and recycling through. We have Bane of Progress. There is not a single artifact in this deck. There is a fair number of enchantments, although. Since this is more of a combo deck designed to try to ramp as fast as possible, and our backup plan is to attack, sometimes we have to try to interact with the opponents while putting out something that can attack. This is a good answer. Same thing, Ulvenwald Hydra is a fantastic card. I love cloning this card, and Rite of Replication used to be in the deck just so I can keep cloning this thing. There are 2 specialty lands in this deck, being an Alchemist Refuge and the Regenerate land, Yavimaya Hollow, that this will tend to go get. We have Prime Speaker Zagana. This is an important topic for Arix. There's a fair number of cards in the game that care about a creature's power when you cast the card. Like, you cast this card and you target a creature and you draw up its power. There's the one from Theros that gives it +3/+3 and trample. When it connects, you draw that many cards this turn. Those cards are fantastic in the right deck. For example, the Hexproof Cigar Deluxe, that one I just mentioned. The problem with Arix is that when you cast those cards, people will kill Arix. He does not have protection. You cannot regenerate, or unless you're wasting other cards to give him like Hexproof or so. So you cannot run all the cards that matter about his power. There's a fair number of good cards that don't target, and that's what I'm getting at here. Prime Speaker doesn't target. So yeah, you could have something small like a Maul Drifter, and that may, if they kill Arix in response to you casting Prime Speaker, that's fine. You'll still draw a few cards. But the best plays here is you have a backup creature like the Hydra. If you know your opponents are all tapped out, this would be the time to remove the counter off of Arix. Because if you're using him as a land, he has that one last counter on him, and you cast the Prime Speaker, You can then remove the counter, he will become a creature, and then she will come into play and check and see Arix. Just be careful when running things like this because you have to protect Arix, or you have to have a backup plan. There's very few effects in my deck remaining that do this. I think I have 3, and Prime Speaker is one of the good ones. Let's go on. We have Consecrated Sphinx because blue-green decks like to draw cards. Green Warden of Marasa for more recursion. We have Nezahal because this is actually one of my favorite cards, and any chance I can, any kind of ramp blue strategy, I will play this dumb dinosaur. I don't know why I enjoy this thing so much, but I do. We have Pterodastodon, as in Terry Nasty. I don't really like the card Tooth and Nail, but there is a Tooth and Nail in the deck, and these are ideally the 2 that I will get. If it's not, I'd try not to get this early in the game because I don't like destroying or upsetting lands. This is a deck designed for having fun with. But I almost always get Nezahal, and if not Nezahal, I will go get the Ketok Leviathan. We do have a Crater Hoof in the deck. Again, I don't have an Avenger of Zendikar. I could easily squeeze Avengers of Zendikar in here with that Tooth and Nail and have a generic green ramp dot win deck. I don't like that interaction, and I just hate those. I really don't like this card at all. This may be the first one I cut when I can find a better replacement creature I enjoy. We have the Leviathan as one of the remaining massive board wipes in the deck. This is great because he hits non-land permanents, so if Nezahal is in play in your land spot, he will remain in play. Other things like Devastation Tide and things like that used to be in the deck for this exact same reason. And the last creature is Jenny. Again, I don't normally run this. I have this because I have recently modified my Legacy Reanimator deck, and this is a Laboratory Maniac deck. Sometimes we don't have the opportunity to put our entire deck in play. We have to do it the hard way by manually drawing 7 cards every turn. But this is still a very fantastic card. 10 mana is not too hard to reach at. The goal of the deck is a turn 3 ramp spell in our command zone, giving us 6 mana at least on turn 4. So getting up to 10 is not out of range. Let's go on to the spells. Now, as you would expect with a green-blue deck, we are running Cyclonic Rift. Arguably an obnoxious card. I think people are fanatical when they come to complaining about what this card does. I've heard some very terrible ideas of how to respond to Cyclonic Rift and people making suggestions of like spells that put token permanents into play if you bounce something. No, just stop complaining and deal with it. This is a blue card. This is how blue deals with permanents, and I'm sorry if you don't like that, but yeah. If you honestly are of the opinion where Cyclonic Rift is a ban-worthy card, then I think you need to get with a stronger group of players that play other cards. Just a personal opinion to throw out there. Snap. This is one of the remainders where I had tested playing Arix as an aggro commander, trying to rush him out as fast as possible. The effects that untap your lands, like this and Frantic Search, very powerful when you have a land naturally that taps for 2 mana. A lot of those are not in the deck anymore because, again, focusing on getting a 12/12 attacker and then getting blown out, not the best of ideas. Just don't try it. But some of these are very good. Frantic Search was a recent cut, but Snap is definitely worth its time because I can return anyone's creature. I can save my own ETB value creature. I can use this as a +1 mana ritual if I need to. It's just a very good card in this deck. I would recommend it. We have Heroic Intervention. This is a great way to protect all of our permanents. This gives it Shroud and Indestructible. Arix is a land, and this can give him hexproof. Sometimes your commander, being a land, is vulnerable to a strip mine. And while we can't really rebuy him with Crucible Worlds, we can give him hexproof. We have a Regrowth. Recollect was another thing in the deck, but that turned into a Green Warden of Marasa. We have Corrosion Grip as a little bit of hate. Overwhelming Stampede. This is another one of the few cards remaining in the deck that is reliant on a creature's power. For example, I think the last one of these type of cards I took out was the Crater Goat Behemoth, whatever the Pathbreaker Ibex. I call it Crater Goat. That thing is when it attacks, it checks for power. That's way too much time for your opponents to check and respond. This thing, although, can be one of the cards you cast to remove the last counter off of Arix. And then by the card resolving, it will see the 12/12 and give your whole team +12/+12. And more importantly, trample. Arix has no evasion. So this one card can make this a lethal hit to somebody. And if you have a bunch of dorks out like a Farhaven Elf, it's going to hurt someone else really hard. It's good at punching people. Now we have not a lot of tutors in this deck to work with, but we do have a Mystical to try to set up some kind of spell. We have a Natural Order. This is fantastic at stacking a dork and getting something like Pterodactyl if we need to be hateful to somebody. I loathe the card Tooth and Nail. This is a degenerate card that people tend to ramp into to try to end games as fast as possible. Yes, Counterspell stops the card, and I am complaining about it, but this is just a card that I am tired of seeing. I am playing it in this deck, mainly because I like putting Nezahal and Devastation Tide into play. Devastation Tide being the Catalytic Leviathan. We have a Chord of Calling. This is an instant speed tutor for Convoke. This is, again, going to get some ETB value creature. And we have Genesis Wave. If we have infinite green mana, this puts our entire deck into play, which ideally will win the game. There is a few tricks that we have in the deck to try to guarantee a win, because people will oftentimes see a Laboratory Maniac trigger go on the stack and then try to kill it when you try to draw. For example, if Maul Drifter draw triggers on the stack when this is in play after we put our whole deck into play, we have other ways of going about trying to protect it. We can layer the stack also to do different things. For example, we have Eternal Witness to pick up a Heroic Intervention. We are getting to the enchantments here, but there is a greater good, so we can sacrifice things in response to put another draw trigger on the stack. We have, while the lands are most likely coming into play, or maybe already tapped, we have a Yavimaya Hollow to give something regenerate. There are tricks to protect this combo, and of course we may not even want to put the entire deck into play. We have a Concordant Crossroads, so an alternative to using Lab Man, for example, if he's extracted or we can't recur it, is to just kill somebody with combat damage. And I'll go on to that shortly. Now, again, there's a handful of these that are just really good at pulling counters off of Eric's. Getting them into play on turn 3 is great, but sometimes you get a follow-up spell that you want to play utilizing his 12/12 power as fast as possible. And these are also fantastic at early game, setting up your lands. We have a fetch land and a lot of shuffle effects for the Brainstorm, and Ponder is just a very good card here. We have Pull from Tomorrow. Again, if we have infinite mana, we're going to deck ourselves. Better yet, a more protective way is to stroke out an opponent. We can stroke ourselves for like one less than our entire deck. And we can just recollect stroke, and with the rest of our mana, stroke out the other opponents. That will give us like enough recursion to keep picking this up from our graveyard that we should be able to knock out 3 opponents with. Rishkar's Expertise. I believe this is the second to last card involving Eric's, again, a spell that does not check for power. Well, it checks for power but does not target. And again, there's a handful of cards that do exactly what this does, but they target a creature. You can play those if you want. I would not recommend it. But this is, again, a 6-drop that we can cast. And if Eric's is down to 1 counter, we can remove the counter and then draw 12 and play a free 6-drop. Fantastic, being that it doesn't count. It does not check for him. So if we have something else in play, we're still going to draw cards. And we have some more Draw and Recurring Insight. A fantastic follow-up to a turn 3 Eric's is a turn 4 Recurring Insight. And Time Spiral, same thing for refilling. And the rest of this giant stack here is Ramp. We have a lot of 2-drop ramps, things to get. So we have a turn 3 Eric's when possible. And hint, we have snow-covered lands in the deck only because of this one spell, giving us 4 2-drop spells. We have the Cultivate and Kadama's Reach for filling our hands. Skyshroud Claim is fantastic because the lands do not come into play tapped. As I said, Eric's is Explosive Veggies. He's a 4-drop ramp spell, but the lands are tapped. Skyshroud Claim, while one of few 4-drops in the deck, it's worth playing because the lands are untapped. You can continue playing stuff from your hand. And the last one is the final card that cares about a creature's power but doesn't target. And this is kind of a win more, really. Sometimes in games, if the first person that casts Boundless Realms and can't protect themselves usually dies. And that is an issue with this. Because sometimes we need Eric's to tap for the mana to cast this, and then we'll have a tap down Eric's. When this works, you get 12 or more lands into play, and that's just a fantastic ramp spell. Literally 5 mana for 12 permanents into play. The scary thing is, of course, someone kills Eric's, or you have this too early in the game and you can't pull the counters off of Eric's. And again, this is a win more. We don't need that spell to win the game with. We just need a specific volume of blue mana to enchant Eric's to get infinite mana. So oftentimes this is a card that's been in and out. Currently it's still in. It may be replaced soon. Let's go on through the rest of the non-land permanents, and then we'll hit lands. Now, there are 2 enchant creatures in here, and they're freed from the Rio and Penman's aura. We have a Concordant Crossroads. So we have a Genesis Wave, and we can try to plug our entire deck into play. And if that happens, then we can give them all haste. There's no Chroma's Memorial in here, but this is a nice 1-drop, because if we happen to also cantrip enough off of Arix, like removing the counters, a 1-drop is a nice cheap way of making him a hasty 12/12. Now, this is scary because it affects your opponent's creatures. That's not good. But something like this with like a Savala is a very good setup. This is a little bit of a ballsy card, and when considering the Genesis Wave route, you do have to do some math, because if Prime Speaker Zagana is still in your deck, and something like the Ulvenwald Hydra comes into play, Prime Speaker requires you to draw. That is not a May ability. This scenario is assuming Laboratory Maniac's not available. Prime Speaker will deck you, so you do have to do a little bit of math there. We have the Sylvan Library for a broken 2-drop. Greater Good, again, more foreign cards. This is sack a creature, draw per its power, then discard 3. So sacking Arix to draw 12 and discard 3 seems like a good value. And Treachery, more ways of untapping lands. This is, oddly enough, typically used to, number 1, just annoy somebody, but more likely to hit 6 mana. 5 mana to untap and go up to 6 mana some way, shape, or form, so I can then cast something like Recurring Insight. And then the one and only Planeswalker. If you're unfamiliar with my channel, I have a tendency to play one single Planeswalker in every deck. It just gives me the ability to like get to know that Planeswalker as well as I can, the ins and outs of the mechanics, and gives me something to look forward to and something to protect when it comes into play. This is the one and only green Planeswalker I like. This is a very dumb one in EDH. Being able to get this ultimate the turn after she comes into play is ridiculous, essentially giving us a permanent emblem of that Tatyova effect, landfall equal card draw. The -3 is also very relevant. Everything on this card is relevant, and if you are looking for a green Planeswalker, this is probably one of the better ones. Ignore the PlayStation making noise in the background there. Let's go on through the lands. We have a nice chunk of them here. There's a very few number of non-basics. We don't need a lot of non-basics. It's a green ramp deck. But we have the command tower because it's untapped fixing. We have a singleton fetch to go get a fetchable target or 2. And then finally we have more untapped like filter lands. These would hopefully be replaced if they make the cycling land or whatever just more fetchable targets, because things like the Wood Elves can go grab them. And then we have 2 techie lands, a nice foil, Yavimaya Hollow, and an Alchemist of Refuge. These are what the Hydra, the Ulvenwald Hydra, tends to get. Again, the regeneration is very important, trying to keep this untapped if we try to dump our entire deck into play with Genesis Wave to protect Laboratory Maniac, for example. And again, doing stupid things at the end of the opponent's turn. It's a sneaky thing. Then we have 20 Force and 10 Islands, all snow-covered because reasons. And that is my Arixmethes Arix deck. Yeah, I don't really know how to pronounce his name. I'm sure there's a proper guide out there I could follow, but that takes effort. So if you have any ideas or feedback or anything about Arix, definitely let me know. I enjoy this. Again, I am a bit of a hypocrite by playing these colors, and I know recently some YouTube channels have been grading and evaluating the most powerful colors in EDH, and I have some very strong opinions about those channels giving that kind of bad information or unguided information. But in short, my preference for colors is always red, black-red, Grixis. I'm not a fan of white and green, and I have of the opinion that green and blue is some of the least interesting colors to play in EDH for various reasons. In short, the nicest way I can think of saying this is that if there's a new player at the table, I am likely going to give them this deck, because this deck doesn't take a lot of thought power. And I may offend people by saying that, and I'm sorry if I did offend you, but I mean, I'm sorry. But yeah, any feedback or ideas, if you like this giant Kraken thing, definitely let me know. Thanks.